So who are patriot groups? It includes historical examples like the Militia Montana and the Montana Freemen, up through current groups like the Oath Keepers, 3% militias, and the Bundy family. Now, the Bundy family are what I'd like to call the Pied Piping family of armed standoffs with the federal government. They're the ones that led the armed standoffs both in Nevada and Oregon. Now, these patriot groups, they interact pretty easily with the political mainstream because they're talking about guns, they're talking about taxes, they're talking about property rights and other issues that we, I think, all pretty much view as being part of the political mainstream. But one of the things that's really important to remember is where this movement originated. The patriot movement and the militia movement specifically, especially in the Pacific Northwest, really evolved out of the white nationalist movement. When you look at the framers and the architects of the militia movement of the 1990s, they came out of the hardcore white nationalist movement, and many of them followed a religion called Christian identity. So Christian identity is based on a racist and anti-Semitic interpretation of the Christian Bible. It teaches that Jews are the literal children of Satan, the people of color are subhuman mud people, and that the lost tribes of Israel actually migrated to Northern European white countries. So therefore, white people are God's chosen people. So this was the religion taught and practiced by Aryan nations, and again, many other groups here in the Pacific Northwest. So again, going back to some of the early framers and some of the very influential people in the militia movement, you find these connections to identity. A couple of those include John Trockman, who's pictured on the top of this slide, who was the founder of the Militia Montana, and his family were all identity adherents, and Trockman himself had spent time working with Aryan nations over in northern Idaho. Bo Greitz, who's the middle picture here, another very influential militia leader who was also an identity adherent. This list goes on and on and on and on. Now, what happened is these early framers made a conscious effort to create the militia movement in a way that downplayed racism and anti-Semitism to have more appeal in the mainstream. They recognized the limitations that exist, that, you know, frankly, racial slurs, blatant anti-Semitism, burning crosses on people's front lawn turns the vast majority of people off. So what they did was they sat down and they took these conspiracy theories, these anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that are core to the white nationalist movement, and they basically substituted out blatant anti-Semitism and blatant racism and added in guns and taxes. Okay, that's a little simplistic, but that's essentially what they did. So these one world government conspiracy theories of the white nationalist movement that centered around international Jews now all of a sudden centered around international bankers and international elites. So what this means is the militia movement has racist and anti-Semitic roots. And you continue to see that when you look at that evolution of how the movement formed. So these early architects of the 90s movement, they took pieces. They took pieces from anti-Semitic and white nationalist groups like the Posse Comitatus and Aryan nations. As they were putting this together, you had the standoff at Ruby Ridge with the Randy Weaver family. Randy Weaver also spent time at Aryan nations, but where, because of the way that standoff went down, they were able to almost sort of test this message that they were coming up with, that you know what happens when the New World Order comes and one world government comes, the government will kill good patriots. So they were able to sort of test out some of these early messages during the Ruby Ridge standoff. And then following the Ruby Ridge standoff, so this would be kind of in late 92, you had a Christian identity pastor named Pete Peters convened, had basically a strategic meeting in Estes Park, where one of the pieces that came out of this was this idea to form militias and to keep this militia movement going forward as a way to mainstream white nationalism. So the militia movement has these racist and anti-Semitic roots, and it's really important, I think, for all of us to remember that current groups like the Oath Keepers, like the 3%ers, and those types of groups grew from these same roots.